Put it down, I said, my voice steady even though my heart hammered like it wanted out of my chest. If you've ever trusted the wrong people, this story will hit home. Stay with me until the end. Every moment matters. That was the first thing that came out of my mouth when I saw the two shadows crouched by my shed at 11:47 p.m. on a cold November night. The porch light behind me flickered once, like it wasn't sure it wanted to witness what came next. I'm 67 years old. I don't scare easily anymore. Life has a way of wringing the fear out of a woman after a certain number of disappointments, betrayals, and funerals. But seeing my own sister and my nephew hunched over something they were trying to hide, on my property in my yard, sent a different kind of chill through me. Not fear. Not surprise. Recognition. I stood there in my robe and slippers, my breath floating in front of me in thin pale ribbons, and let the quiet settle over us. Calm, unhurried. Because unlike them, I already knew where the night was heading. I'd suspected for weeks something wasn't right. And I'd made preparations. Little ones. Quiet ones. The kind of preparations you don't announce. The kind that give a woman an advantage. The air carried the sharp metallic smell of something chemical, faint but unmistakable. My nose has always been too good for its own use. Gardening does that to you. Decades of mixing soil fertilizers, treatments. Your senses learn how to separate normal from not normal. And whatever they were holding, it didn't belong in the yard at midnight. I pulled my robe tighter around myself, feeling the cold seep through the fabric. The yard was coated in a thin crust of frost that cracked softly under my slippers. The branches of the old maple near the fence clicked together in the breeze like two bones knocking. My sister, Marilyn, finally turned her head toward me. She froze for half a heartbeat, then tried to smile. A shaky, guilty thing that belonged more on a child caught stealing cookies than on a woman who should have known better. "Oh, Linda," she said, voice too bright for the darkness around us. "You startled us. We were just checking something," her son blurted out. He pushed the jug behind his leg, but the porch light caught a glimmer of liquid on the cap. Too late. I'd already seen it. I said nothing. I only stepped forward one small step at a time, like I had all the time in the world. Because I did. Because they were the ones running out of explanations. The cold air wrapped around me, carrying the faint sound of the highway in the distance and the rustling of dry leaves skittering across the ground. I could hear Marilyn's breathing, short, sharp, uneven. My nephew Ethan stood stiff and too still, the way someone looks when they're bracing to run. "I heard something," I said, letting my eyes drift around the yard like I was just now taking in the scene. A bang. Thought maybe a raccoon knocked over the trash cans again. A small lie. I had heard something, yes, but it wasn't a bang. It was a voice. Ethan's. Whispering. Urgent. And then the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal. The lock on my shed. I didn't mention that part. Instead, I took another step down onto the frozen grass. The frost crunched under me loud enough that both of them flinched, like guilt made the sound sharper. "What are you holding?" I asked. Just a simple question. But simple questions can land like bricks when the right truth is hiding behind them. Marilyn shifted her weight. "Oh, this? It's nothing. Just something Ethan brought by. For your garden beds." The lie came out too fast. I raised an eyebrow. "At midnight." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked at Ethan as if he might rescue her. He didn't. Instead, he pressed his lips into a thin line and stared at the shed like he wished the door would swallow him. I let a beat of silence stretch between us. The kind that says without saying, "I know more than you think." And I did know more. I knew someone had been walking around my property the past 3 weekends. I knew because the soil outside the shed had been disturbed in a way that wasn't natural to the wind or rain. I knew because the latch had scratches inconsistent with normal use. And most importantly, I knew because I'd set a small, nearly invisible piece of fishing line across the shed door 2 nights ago, just to see if someone would break it. And tonight they had. But I didn't tell them that. I didn't reveal a thing. Hidden advantages only work when they stay hidden. As we stood there, the yard felt too quiet. Too still. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what I'd do next. "Let's go inside," I said finally. "It's too cold for this." Marilyn hesitated. Ethan swallowed hard. But they came with me like 2 students following a teacher who'd already seen their cheat sheets. The warmth of the kitchen hit me as soon as I stepped inside. The old heater rattled like it always did, blowing air that smelled faintly of dust and cinnamon from the potpourri I kept on the counter. The yellow glow from the overhead light softened the edges of the tension, but not enough to hide it. I motioned for them to sit at the table. Marilyn kept her coat on, arms crossed tightly. Ethan sat stiffly, tapping a nervous rhythm on his thigh. I poured water into the kettle, letting the sound fill the space while I kept my back to them. Sometimes quiet can do what shouting never could. I'd like to know, I said slowly, why the two of you were near my shed this late. Another simple sentence. Another heavy one. Marilyn cleared her throat. We were checking because, well, we heard you've been having trouble sleeping. We thought maybe you forgot to lock it. I turned around and leaned against the counter, arms folded. Marilyn, I said softly, don't insult me. She blinked hard, her face tightening. For a moment she looked like the sister I grew up with, the one who used to borrow my sweaters and laugh too loud at her own jokes. But that girl was long gone. Now there was only the woman who avoided my eyes whenever money or property came up in conversation. I know what I saw, I continued. And whatever you were holding out there wasn't plant food. Ethan shifted. His knee began bouncing under the table. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to me. Linda, Marilyn whispered, we didn't mean. The kettle began to hum, building toward a whistle, but I didn't take it off the stove. I wanted that rising sound. The tension it added. The way it forced them to sit there and wait, just like they'd forced me to wait for weeks, wondering who had been sneaking around my yard. I've noticed footprints lately, I said. Near the shed. Near the fence. Even around the garden beds. Ethan's legs stopped bouncing. And I found the latch scratched, I added. Looked like someone tried to pry it. The kettle shrieked then, a sharp echoing sound that sliced through the silence. I turned it off. They both jumped. I poured tea into 3 mismatched mugs and slid 2 across the table. Neither reached for theirs. I sat down slowly, folding my hands. Before either of you speak, I said, remember that I am not confused. I am not frail. And I am not alone out here. It was a simple sentence. But the part that mattered, the part they didn't understand, sat underneath the words. Because I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone for a long time. Not with the steps I'd taken. Not with the quiet help I'd arranged. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. What were you planning to do? I asked quietly. Neither answered. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second heavier than the last. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the road. A car door slammed in the distance. Life moved on, unaware of the storm brewing in my kitchen. Finally, Marilyn looked up, her eyes glassy. We just wanted to, she began. But before she could finish, I leaned forward slightly. And that was enough. She swallowed her words. I watched her. Watched Ethan. Watched the fear and guilt and something else flicker across their faces. Something they didn't want me to name yet. Not tonight. Not in this room. I let the silence linger until it wrapped around them. Then I asked the last question of the night. Gentle, steady, but sharp enough to cut through any lie they might try. Tell me, I said, why were you really out there? And I ended it there. Because some answers are meant for the next chapter. My question hung in the air like a stubborn fog, and for a long moment, neither of them dared breathe too deeply. They both looked at me as if they hoped I'd blink first or soften, or somehow let them slide past the truth with a shrug and a weak apology. But I didn't move. I sat there, hands folded on the table, watching the steam rise from my tea and drift between us like a thin veil. My kitchen clock ticked softly on the wall. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and the pine cleaner I'd used earlier that afternoon. Everything felt ordinary. Everything except the 2 uneasy adults sitting across from me. Ethan opened his mouth first, but Marilyn laid a hand on his arm quickly, the way she used to when he was young and on the verge of saying something he shouldn't. Her fingers trembled, though she tried to steady them. Linda, she started, her voice low, you're making too much of this. A lie right out of the gate. I felt my jaw tighten, not in anger but in something closer to disappointment. At 67, I have less patience for lies than I ever did in my 40s or 50s. Losing a husband, living alone, keeping a house running. All those experiences sharpen a woman's tolerance for nonsense. And in that moment, sitting across from my own sister, I felt that familiar, steady stillness rise inside me. Then explain it, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Soft questions cut deeper. Marilyn looked down at her mug, though she hadn't touched the tea. She traced the rim with her finger, circling the ceramic again and again as if a real answer might appear there if she kept trying. We were concerned, she said finally. That's all. Concerned about you. Another lie. A softer one but still a lie. I studied her face. Her eyes were puffy around the edges as if she hadn't been sleeping well. Her coat was cheap wool, the sleeves stretched from wear. Her hair, usually her pride, was pinned back sloppily as though she'd rushed out without checking a mirror. All that told me something. Whatever was going on had been eating at her. Concerned about what? I asked, though I already had a list of possible answers. She forced a smile. You've been under a lot of stress. After Robert passed, well, we just thought maybe you needed someone to look out for you. That one almost made me laugh. A bitter little laugh that tried to climb up my throat but didn't make it out. I pressed my hands flat on the table instead, grounding myself. My husband's name felt heavy in the room, heavier than the air, heavier than their excuses. I let the silence stretch after she said it. Not cruelly, just long enough for her to realize I wasn't going to let her hide behind grief that wasn't hers. I appreciate concern, I said, but that doesn't explain what I saw. My voice didn't waver. Hers did. We just noticed the shed door looked off when we drove by earlier, she said, each word wobbling slightly. We thought maybe an animal got into it. You know how raccoons can be. Raccoons. At midnight. Holding a jug of chemicals. Marilyn, I said softly. Stop. She looked up sharply then, her eyes shining too bright under the kitchen light. For a second she looked almost angry, caught between defending herself and lashing out at me for not believing her. But anger was easier than guilt, and guilt was written all over her. Ethan finally spoke. Aunt Linda, it wasn't like that. We were just... His voice cracked, but he pushed through. Trying to help you. The same line. Repeated. Practiced. Maybe. Coordinated. Absolutely. But something else caught my attention. His knee wasn't bouncing anymore. He sat too still now, the way people do when they're trying not to reveal something important. I leaned back in my chair, letting my gaze shift between them. Why didn't either of you call me first? I asked. If you thought something was wrong? Ethan's mouth opened, but he had nothing. His silence said more than anything he could have spoken. Marilyn glanced around the kitchen as if searching for an escape. We didn't want to worry you. I inhaled slowly, letting the breath fill my chest and settle my nerves. My shed is 20 feet from the house, I said. You were 2 minutes away from knocking on my door. Instead you were trying to break a lock. Marilyn's silence tightened like a knot. The kettle let out one last faint hiss before cooling, and I reached out to wrap my palms around my mug. The warmth helped steady me even though my thoughts were anything but steady. My hands shook slightly, something I hoped they didn't notice. Not from fear but from the sting of betrayal cutting deeper than I'd expected. Let's do something simple, I suggested. Tell me what was in the jug Ethan was hiding. Ethan's face drained of color. Marilyn stiffened. It was just... a garden-safe treatment? I offered. No. A fertilizer? No. A cleaner. Silence. The kind that answers everything and nothing at the same time. I pushed my mug aside gently and folded my hands. I found residue on the shed door earlier this week, I said. A chemical. Not one I keep. Ethan swallowed so hard I heard it. What kind of chemical? He asked, his voice shaky but trying to sound brave. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know it didn't belong there. Marilyn's expression flickered. Just a second, but enough. Worry. Fear. Something she didn't want me to see. They knew exactly what had been on that door. I leaned forward just slightly. Is there something I should be worried about, Marilyn? She shook her head too quickly. No. Of course not. By number. I'd lost count. But something changed then. Something in the air. Something small but noticeable. Ethan's eyes shifted toward the window, then toward the narrow hallway that led to my back door. A tiny movement. A fraction of a second. But I caught it. He was checking their exit. That told me more about their intentions than anything they'd said so far. I let the moment stretch. They stayed frozen, waiting for me to speak, to accuse, to blow up. But I didn't yell. That wasn't my way. I'd raised children. I'd managed a home. I'd buried a husband. I'd handled harder nights than this one. My calm scared them more than anger ever could. I want the truth, I said. Not the version that makes you look better. My sister rubbed her forehead with her fingertips, looking suddenly older than she'd looked when she walked in. The denial drained out of her slowly, like she knew she didn't have many lies left to lean on. We didn't want you to feel overwhelmed, she said quietly. We thought maybe you needed help managing things. Managing things. Not the yard. Not the shed. Things. That word had weight. Intent. Planning. And it clicked into place with something else I'd noticed earlier in the week. My mail missing one day, then suddenly showing up stuffed back into the box. A notice from the township office that looked like it had been opened and resealed. A voicemail erased before I could hear it, even though the machine logs the time it was received. All small things, easy to overlook. But together, they painted a picture. A picture that aligned a little too neatly with tonight. I didn't say any of that out loud. Instead, I pushed back from the table slowly, my chair scraping softly across the floor. The sound made both of them jolt. I'm going to ask again, I said, standing so I could look at them without the filter of the table between us. Why were you really out there tonight? This time neither tried to speak. Marilyn pressed her lips together, her face pale and tight. Ethan stared down at the wood grain in the table as if it held a way out. I let the silence build, thick and heavy. Because unless you tell me the truth, I said, I'll have to assume the worst. And they both knew what the worst meant. Knew it in the way their shoulders tensed. Knew it in the way their breaths caught in their throats. Knew it because they had come here with a plan, and it wasn't the innocent one they kept trying to sell me. Finally, Marilyn lifted her head. Her voice shook when she spoke. Linda, there are things you don't understand. The sentence sent a cold ripple through me. Not because she was right, but because she believed it. I stared at her, at my sister, at the woman who used to braid my hair before school and help me sneak cookies before dinner. What things? I asked softly. Her jaw clenched. We were trying to protect you, she whispered. Protect me. My chest tightened. From what? Or worse, from whom? Before I could ask, she reached out and grabbed my hand across the table. Her fingers were cold. Too cold. We didn't mean to hurt anything, she said. We were trying to make sure everything stays manageable for you. Manageable. There it was again. I pulled my hand back slowly, not out of cruelty but because I needed to breathe. Because something in her tone had shifted from guilt to something far stranger. Something that hinted at motives I hadn't pieced together yet. Marilyn, I said slowly, what exactly are you trying to manage? Her eyes darted to Ethan. Ethan's eyes darted to the back hallway again. Something unsaid passed between them. Something they didn't want me to hear. And that's when I realized. Whatever reason they'd been out by my shed. Whatever reason they were lying to me now. It wasn't the whole story. Not even close. I took a step back from the table, my heart beating harder than before. Tell me, I said again, softer now. Why were you really out there? And instead of answering, they both stood up. At the exact same time. A decision. A silent one. And I realized. I wasn't going to get the truth tonight. Not willingly. Not from them. Not yet. I saw the way you looked at each other, I said, my voice low and tired, the final words from the last section still hanging in the air between us. So go on. Why don't you tell me the part you didn't think I'd figure out? They didn't answer. Not right away at least. Frank shifted from one foot to the other like a schoolboy caught sneaking out. Melissa crossed her arms tight, her mouth pressed into a thin line. The kind she used to give me as a teenager whenever she got caught in a lie. The porch light flickered above us, humming like it was tired of listening already. I could feel the cool night air sliding across my arms, and even that felt sharper than their silence. I waited. I wasn't about to fill the empty space for them. Frank finally cleared his throat. Mom, this isn't what you think. Then tell me, I said. Because every time you two open your mouths tonight, I hear everything except the truth. He tried smiling. A thin, uncertain thing that didn't reach his eyes. Let's all calm down. We're worked up. We can talk about this inside. Inside. I repeated. So you can stand in my kitchen and lie with better lighting? Melissa sucked in a breath. Mom, please. You're being dramatic. That word hit harder than it should have. Dramatic. The same word my husband used years ago whenever he wanted to dismiss me without looking like the bad guy. It wasn't the worst word in the dictionary, but it was the easiest one to weaponize politely. I'm being observant, I said, stepping closer. You two didn't come here to help. You didn't come here to check on me. And you certainly didn't come because you care about the house. I watched their eyes then, because people lie with their words but their eyes still flinch at the truth. Frank looked at the grass. Melissa looked at the edge of the porch. Not one of them looked at me. And that told me everything I needed. Whatever their real motive was, they didn't have the stomach to say it out loud. But I wasn't letting them off that easily. Before either of them could speak, a gust of wind rustled through the trees behind us. That night air carried the faint smell of cut grass and damp earth, the same smell that always drifted across my yard after the sun dipped behind the trees. And beneath it I caught something else. Something faint but familiar. A sharp, chemical scent. Not the harsh one from earlier near the fence. This one was older. Fainter. Like something diluted. My stomach tightened. I recognized scents better than most people. It was one of those odd, small skills you pick up living alone for years. You notice everything that doesn't belong. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch long enough for them to sweat. Melissa finally broke. Mom, this is getting ridiculous. Her voice trembled despite her trying to sound steady. You're twisting everything. Twisting? I asked. Or untangling? She blinked, thrown off by the question. Frank glanced at her, then back at me. We told you why we're here. You told me part of why you're here, I corrected. The rehearsed part. The part that sounds good if someone else were listening. That made them both stiffen, and I filed that reaction away. People always reveal themselves in what they fear someone might overhear. I folded my arms, matching Melissa's posture but not her defensiveness. Mine was controlled. Firm. I wasn't bluffing. Let me ask this, I continued. If the neighbor hadn't called me, would either of you have told me you were on my property tonight at all? Frank swallowed. Hard. Melissa's eyes darted toward the fence again just for a split second, and that tiny movement confirmed at least one suspicion I'd been carrying since the end of the last chapter. They didn't just happen to be near the fence earlier. They had been doing something there. Something they weren't willing to confess. Honestly, I said, letting the quiet stretch again, I think the only real question left is how much of the truth you think I already know. Melissa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're misinterpreting everything. We weren't trying to hide anything. We just came to. To what? I asked sharply. Finish something before I noticed? The words hit them harder than I expected. Melissa's face drained of color. Frank actually took a step back like I'd hit him with a gust of wind. And just like that, the tension shifted. They weren't standing in a defensive huddle anymore. They were standing like people who'd been discovered. And they knew it. But discovery isn't the same as understanding. Not yet. I could feel a faint tremor in my hands, the kind you get when your body feels something before your mind catches up. I curled my fingers so they wouldn't see. I wasn't scared. I was angry. Angry in a slow, deep way that didn't shake. It burned. Mom, Frank said softly, can we just talk inside? There was a subtle desperation in his voice this time. And I knew what it meant. Whatever secret they had wasn't meant for the open air. Which meant it was bigger. I leaned against the porch rail. Not to rest. To make a point. Say it out here. Right where you were standing when I found you. Melissa's jaw tightened. We didn't want you worrying. That's all. Try again. Mom, please. Try again. Frank sighed loudly, frustration cutting through his voice. Fine. You want the truth? Then you need to stop assuming the worst and let us explain. Explain what? I asked. He opened his mouth. Melissa grabbed his arm. Don't, she whispered urgently. That whisper was soft, but it might as well have been a siren. They weren't united anymore. They weren't even coordinating. Their story was unraveling right in front of me. I stepped closer. Why shouldn't he tell me, Melissa? Her face went blank for a moment, like she needed to reorganize her expression before showing it. Because it's complicated. It's convenient, I corrected. Her lips pressed together. I took another step closer, lowering my voice. What exactly did you two plan to do tonight? Start small. Tell me that. Frank's shoulders sagged. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Then how was it supposed to go? He didn't answer. But Melissa did. It wasn't supposed to be at night, she said quietly, each word slow like she was forcing herself to let go of something. We were going to come tomorrow. During the day. Talk things through. Make a plan. A plan for what? She hesitated. Then, for you. That word landed heavy. For me, I repeated. Or for my property? Her mouth opened slightly, surprised that I'd gone straight there. And that surprise told me I'd hit the mark. She looked away again, second time in this chapter, and stared toward the large oak tree near the back of the yard. A tree she hadn't looked at in years. That was when I realized something else. They hadn't just been at the fence earlier. They'd been near the old shed too. I remembered how the grass had looked slightly bent in that direction when I walked out. Not trampled. Just disturbed. Melissa, I said, lowering my voice even more, were you two planning something with the shed? Her head jerked around. What? No. Why would we? She stopped herself. Too late. Frank rubbed his forehead. This is exactly why we didn't want to do this at night. Do what? I asked again. Tell me about the shed? Or what you think is inside it? Their eyes flickered then, fast, nervous, almost guilty. And my pulse quickened. I hadn't touched that shed in months. Not because I was hiding something, but because it wasn't used much anymore. I kept a few tools there. Old gardening supplies. A box of family photos I'd been avoiding sorting through. Nothing worth sneaking around for. Nothing worth being here at night. Unless they believed something else was in there. Or unless they'd put something in there themselves. A thin chill crawled up my back. Mom, Melissa said, voice soft enough that it nearly wavered, please. Don't make assumptions. Not right now. I let her words settle and breathed slowly through my nose. The scent of that faint chemical trace wafted again, just barely noticeable under the night breeze. No assumptions, I told myself. Only observations. Only truths. I stepped off the porch and onto the grass. The earth felt cool and uneven beneath my shoes. I walked a few steps closer to them, just enough that neither could look away without making it obvious. You both have been acting strange all week, I said. Phone calls that end when I answer. Messages that say, we should talk, but never follow through. And now tonight, sneaking around my yard, whispering at the fence and refusing to look me in the eye. Their expressions shifted simultaneously, surprise, guilt, and a flash of something else I couldn't identify yet. Fear. Maybe. Not fear of me. Fear of being exposed. I continued, I'm done pretending I don't see it. I'm done letting you talk around things. So here's your chance to be honest. What were you two planning? And what exactly did you think I wouldn't find out? Neither spoke. The quiet between us felt heavy enough to bend the grass. Finally, Frank exhaled shakily. Mom, there's something we need to tell you. But not here. Not like this. Why not here? I asked. He didn't answer. Melissa's eyes glistened. Not tears, just a surface shine, the kind that comes from worry pressing too long on a person's nerves. I held their gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, very slowly, I felt the first edge of a new truth settling in the air between us. Not the whole truth. Not yet. But something was shifting. Something was close. And whatever secret they had been carrying, it wasn't small. It wasn't harmless. And it wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And it wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. That thought settled inside me as I stood there facing my two grown children, both of them shifting uncomfortably in the dark like teenagers caught sneaking out past curfew. The porch light above us buzzed for a moment and then steadied, casting a pale yellow glow across their nervous faces. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, slow, heavy, not from fear but from clarity. I finally understood something essential. Whatever they had been plotting, they never expected me to stand this firmly. I folded my arms. Well, I said quietly, if the truth can't be spoken out here, then we're moving somewhere it can. Before either of them could object, I stepped off the porch and started walking across the yard toward the old picnic table under the maple tree. It wasn't a dramatic move, it was just practical. If they didn't want to talk at the porch, then fine. But they weren't getting inside my house until I knew exactly what they'd been hiding. The grass felt cool and damp beneath my shoes and crickets chirped loudly from the bushes. A few houses down, a dog barked once, the sound snapping through the stillness. The night felt too awake, too aware. Like the whole yard was watching us. I sat at the table and waited, not saying a word. Let them walk to me. Let them decide whether to face this. They followed after a moment, slowly, reluctantly, and stood across from me like I was the judge and they were defendants waiting for their sentence. Sit, I said. It came out sharper than intended, but I didn't apologize. They sat. I could see the tension in the way Melissa twisted her fingers together and the way Frank rubbed the back of his neck. They looked scared. Not of me, of what they thought I might discover. Now talk, I said. Start wherever you want. But no more dancing around it. Frank opened his mouth, but Melissa cut in first. Mom, please just understand something before we explain. That sounds like stalling. It's not, she insisted. You have to know we weren't trying to hurt you. Frank nodded quickly. We thought we were helping. Helping. That word tasted bitter to me. People always use it when they want to justify what they've already decided to do, long before asking if you needed it. And what exactly did you think I needed help with? I asked. They both hesitated. I leaned forward slightly, making sure they saw every inch of my resolve. Say it plainly. No hinting. No circling. Tell me. Frank sighed heavily. We think you've been overwhelmed lately. I stared at him. Overwhelmed by what? You've been forgetful, Melissa said softly, as if sugarcoating the tone would soften the blade. Misplacing things. Getting frustrated. You even said you felt dizzy last week. So they were going there. I felt a cold, steady anger rise, but I kept my face calm. One dizzy spell, I said slowly, because I hadn't eaten. That's all. You also left the stove on, Frank added. For 8 seconds, I corrected. Because the phone rang. They exchanged glances again, that same silent communication they'd used earlier, the kind that said more than their words ever could. I felt something twist in my stomach. You two think I'm losing my mind. We never said that. Melissa insisted. You didn't have to. The air shifted. I felt it. The truth wasn't fully out yet, but we were finally brushing against it. Their real motive wasn't the shed. It wasn't the fence. It wasn't even the chemicals I smelled earlier. It was me. My independence. My life. They had been circling the yard like hawks, but the prey they were eyeing wasn't the property. It was control. Melissa leaned forward. Mom, we've been talking to someone. Who? A counselor, she said. And a legal advisor. A legal advisor. The words hit the table between us like a dropped weight. I didn't react, not outwardly, but my breath sat sharp in my chest. I waited. I wanted to hear the whole thought, not just the first crack of it. Frank cleared his throat. We just wanted to know your options. About the house. About your health. About support. Support. Another gentle word used to disguise something harsher. You mean you've been discussing putting me somewhere? I said. They froze. I didn't need their confirmation. Their silence was enough. I felt a strange calm settle over me, like the moment before a storm breaks. And you thought sneaking around my yard at night was a good lead-in to that conversation? That wasn't about this, Melissa said quickly. That was different. Then explain it. She hesitated. That was my confirmation. You weren't planning to help me with anything, I said. You were planning to help yourselves. Frank finally broke. This place is too much for you, Mom. The yard, the house, the maintenance, it's all falling apart. We've watched you struggle. His voice cracked, but I didn't let the emotion sway me. You've watched, but you haven't asked. He flinched. You never once asked if I needed help, I said. You decided for me. Behind my back. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. We didn't know how to talk to you. You get so defensive. Not defensive, I said quietly. Just aware. They exchanged another heavy glance. I inhaled slowly, letting the cool night air steady me. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they were taking the lead in this story. But they didn't realize something important. Something I had kept tucked behind my irritation and my fear ever since I first spotted them by the fence. I had already begun piecing together my own plan. A plan that didn't involve yelling, crying, or letting them steer the narrative. I was going to steer it myself. Let me ask something, I said. Why the shed? Why were you near it earlier? Frank tensed. We weren't. Don't lie. He swallowed. Melissa looked down. Finally, Melissa spoke. We were checking something. In my shed. Yes, she whispered. What could possibly be in there that you needed to check tonight? They hesitated again. And then, in a tiny slip that neither of them meant to reveal, Frank said, "We just wanted to see if you'd been storing things again." Storing things. My stomach tightened. My jaw set. There it was. They thought I was hoarding, losing touch, letting things rot in corners of my life. That little phrase, storing things, was how my late husband used to refer to his mother's decline. "You think I'm not capable," I said, my voice steady. "You think I've lost control." They didn't answer. And so I continued. "Well, I haven't." I stood up slowly, letting the motion speak for me. "And you're about to find that out." Melissa wiped her eyes. "Mom, please. We just want what's best." "I know," I said. "And so do I." I could feel the shift then, a deep, subtle power moving back into my hands where it belonged. They watched me with uncertainty, the same way children watch their mother when they've gone too far and don't know how far the punishment will reach. But I wasn't planning punishment. I was planning clarity. "Here's what we're going to do," I said. "All three of us. Together." They looked at me, concerned but curious. "We're going to walk to that shed," I continued. "We're going to open it. And you're going to see exactly what's inside." Melissa's face paled. Frank's eyebrows shot up. They weren't expecting this. They weren't expecting me to take control so simply, so directly. "Why?" Melissa asked. "Because," I said, "whatever story you've built in your heads ends tonight." I started walking toward the shed. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I let them absorb my certainty, let them realize that whatever they feared was in that shed, it wasn't what they thought. I swung the flashlight from the porch off the hook and clicked it on. A narrow beam cut through the darkness. Behind me, I heard them finally stand and follow, hesitant steps, unsure steps, the steps of people who realized things were shifting beyond their control. The shed loomed ahead, its wooden frame silvered by moonlight. A few leaves rustled against the roof as a breeze swept through. I stopped a few feet away and turned to them. "You ready?" I asked. Neither answered. So I opened the door. A soft creak echoed into the night. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Organized, clean, labeled. No chaos. No clutter. No sign of decline. Just proof. But I didn't show it to them yet. Instead, I stepped aside, gesturing toward the open doorway. "Go on. Look." They exchanged one last uncertain glance, and walked inside. And that's when the next part of my plan fell quietly into place. They thought they were discovering the truth. But really, they were walking straight into it. I stood in the quiet doorway of the shed, watching the two of them step inside with cautious, uncertain movements. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear this time, but from an odd combination of exhaustion and resolve. The air was cool and still, heavy with the faint scent of old pine boards and dust. Out here under the moonlight, I felt strangely calm, calmer than I'd been in months. Melissa walked in first, hugging her arms around her chest as if bracing for something unpleasant. Frank followed close behind, eyebrows tight, jaw clenched. They were expecting chaos. Piles of forgotten belongings. Rotten boxes. Evidence. Evidence that their fears about me were justified. Evidence they could use. Instead, they found order. And the moment they realized it, I saw the shift in their faces. The shelves were neatly arranged, each box labeled in clean handwriting. Gardening tools hung in tidy rows. The floor was swept. The air inside was crisp, not stale. Every corner looked intentional, maintained, functional. They were expecting a mess. They found legitimacy. "You can turn the light on," I said from the doorway. My voice was steady, even warm, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. Frank reached up and pulled the chain on the ceiling lamp. It clicked, then filled the shed with a soft golden glow. Dust motes swirled lazily in the air, drifting like tiny fireflies. For a long minute, neither of them said a word. I stepped fully inside, letting the door swing halfway shut behind me. "Well," I asked, "see anything that worries you?" Melissa swallowed. "It's clean. Organized," Frank added softly. "Intentional," I corrected. "Everything in its place. Nothing hidden. Nothing forgotten." I let the silence rest for a beat. I wanted them to absorb every inch of it. The smell of the lumber, the cleanliness of the shelves, The unmistakable proof that I hadn't lost myself or my mind. It was only then, with their guard cracking, that I decided it was time for the truth they'd been too afraid to face. Do you know the real reason I haven't invited you both into the shed or the backyard lately? I asked. Melissa opened her mouth but closed it quickly, unsure. I pointed to a cardboard box on the far shelf, marked in bold ink. Estate papers. Final review. Their eyes followed my hand. I wasn't storing things, I said quietly. I was sorting them. Frank blinked. Sorting what? My future. They stiffened. I stepped closer, the gravel beneath my shoes crunching just enough to echo in the small space. I didn't tell you what I've been planning, I continued, because every time I share anything personal, you two look at me like I might break in your hands. You try to fix me before you even understand what's going on. Melissa's shoulders slumped. I wasn't getting forgetful, I said. I was downsizing, simplifying, preparing for the next stage of my life. By choice. Their eyes flicked again toward the estate box. And that's when the deeper truth clicked in their expressions. Fear and realization. You thought I was losing control, I said. But I was reclaiming it. I walked over to the shelf and set the flashlight down. My hands didn't shake anymore. Mom, Melissa whispered, her voice cracking. Why didn't you tell us? I turned to face them both. Because the last time I made a decision for myself, when I sold the small cabin, when I changed the insurance policy, when I updated my health directive, you two acted like I wasn't capable of thinking clearly. You treated me like a fragile ornament to manage, not a person still making her own choices. Frank rubbed his forehead. We were scared. I know, I said gently. But fear doesn't excuse taking my choices away. He blinked hard, and for just a moment he looked like the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knees. Ashamed but trying to be brave. I let out a slow breath. And because you wouldn't stop assuming the worst, I had to make sure I knew what you were planning before I told you what I was planning. There was the final turn. Melissa looked down at the floor. We didn't mean to hurt you. I believe that, I said. But you almost did. The lamp flickered slightly overhead. I could hear a soft rustle outside, the wind moving through the maple leaves. The night seemed to hold its breath right along with us. I walked to the workbench and rested both hands on its wooden surface. What's in that box? I said, nodding at the estate folder. Is my life. My choices. Not yours. They didn't move. And the truth is, I continued, I was going to share it with you next week. During lunch. Calmly. Like a family should. Melissa let out a small, broken sound. We should have trusted you. Yes, I said. You should have. Another silence stretched between us. But this time it wasn't sharp. It wasn't filled with suspicion or half-formed accusations. It was softer. Heavy. Honest. Come here, I said quietly. They stepped closer. I took a breath. Here's what I've been planning. I pointed to the papers inside the open box. I'm selling the house. Melissa gasped. What? But not to move into a facility, I added quickly. Not because I can't take care of myself. And definitely not because I'm declining. They stared at me. I found a cottage, I said. A small place near the creek, 5 minutes from town. 1 story. Easy to maintain. A little garden in the back. It's perfect for me. Melissa shook her head slowly, processing. You already chose a place? Yes. Frank frowned. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted it to be my decision, I said. I wanted to choose something that fit my life, not something you two thought would be convenient for you. The wind outside brushed a few leaves against the shed door. I'm moving in a month, I said. And I'll need help. But not the kind you were offering. Not decisions made behind my back. Not late-night searches through my yard, looking for proof that I can't manage. Their faces softened in a way they hadn't all night. I want your support, I continued. But on my terms. Not yours. Frank nodded slowly, a long exhale slipping out as if he'd finally let go of something heavy. We can do that, he said. We should have done that from the start. I looked at Melissa. She was wiping tears with the edge of her sleeve. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. We were scared of losing you. I stepped closer and touched her arm. You almost did, I said softly. Not because of my health. but because you stopped trusting me. The tears spilled again, silently this time. I didn't let my voice waver. If you want a place in my life going forward, it starts with respect. And honesty. And asking before assuming. Frank nodded, swallowing hard. We understand. I studied them both. Their tired faces, their guilt, their fear, their relief, and felt something inside me finally loosen. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. I'm not done living, I said. I'm not fading. I'm not slipping. I'm choosing. I'm planning. And it's time you saw that. I reached for the shed door and pushed it open. The night air rushed in, cool and clean, stirring my hair just slightly. The moonlight spilled across the ground like a quiet promise. Come on, I said. We're going inside. And we're going to talk like adults. Real talk. All of us. They followed me out of the shed without hesitation this time. We walked toward the house together, 3 silhouettes under the soft glow of the porch light. My steps felt different now. Stronger. Steadier. The weight I'd been carrying for weeks, maybe months, lifted with each stride. As we reached the porch steps, I paused and looked back at the shed one last time. Not because I needed to, but as I wanted to. That little building with its clean shelves and soft golden light held the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped letting fear shape my future. The moment I took my life back. And as I opened my front door with my children standing quietly behind me, I felt a deep, calming truth settle into my bones. I wasn't stepping into a confrontation. I was stepping into my freedom. If this story moved you, stay with me for more. Subscribe so you never miss the next journey of strength, justice, and taking your life back.